LEGO is well known for their top-notch quality checks, and it's one of the key factors that has allowed the company to survive for so many years. However, this isn't always the case, with certain pieces and colors slipping under the radar. But how did this happen? How could LEGO make such a huge mistake, and is it actually getting worse? Well, let's take a look at the LEGO pieces that always break, and we'll start with the most cursed LEGO color ever created. All over the internet, you'll find LEGO fans posting pictures of broken LEGO bricks, and they all appear to be this same reddish-brown color. This specific color of LEGO brick has plagued and cursed LEGO builders for many, many years. This shouldn't be happening, so what is truly wrong with these LEGO bricks? Fans call it brittle brown, and the legend goes that this particular LEGO color is cursed. But how can a color be cursed, you ask? Well, the answer lies in its name. Many LEGO fans have had the unfortunate experience of these LEGO bricks splintering, breaking, and collapsing into plastic rubble, specifically these reddish-brown bricks. Why has the internet seemingly been overrun by people sharing images of broken brown bricks as opposed to any other color, and why are they so fragile? No one could accept that this kind of damage could be a pure coincidence. I mean, not even brown LEGO horses were spared from the wrath of brittle brown. And it seemed like whatever was affecting this color was slowly spreading too, because an increasing number of LEGO fans began reporting on other LEGO brick colors, such as new dark red and pearl gold, that were suspiciously weak and certainly not up to LEGO's high quality standards. So certainly something was wrong. Was this an act of sabotage by a LEGO employee in one of the factories? Did LEGO's machines malfunction, or did LEGO substitute a low-quality material into its bricks to cut costs? Everything was on the table, and LEGO fans had a burning desire to find answers, and luckily the answer was discovered. For decades, LEGO has been using ABS plastic since it's incredibly versatile, easy to mold, and can be created in a staggering array of colors. When it's created, this plastic is originally an off-white color, but by adding various dyes, it's possible to create nearly any color you could imagine, and it seems as though here lies the problem. It turns out that dyes, such as blue and brown, aren't just different colors. In fact, when you get down to the molecular level, there's some pretty massive differences between different colored dyes. Things like the size of the particles that make up the dye pigment, the shape of the polymers being used, the heat tolerance, and other various chemical properties. Think about it like this. If you're making a cake and run out of sugar, you can't just use salt even though they both are white crystalline solids. So basically, it seems as if there was something about the specific reddish-brown dye going into these bricks that interacted with the plastic in such a way that the plastic became overly fragile. Simply put, these bricks were just not as strong. With reports of this issue going all the way back to the 1980s, it seemed as if all hope was lost and we would just have to live in a world of broken brown bricks. That is, until 2017. It seemed that LEGO had been aware of this issue for several years, but kept very quiet. This wasn't out of fear or secrecy though, because it appears that the company itself wasn't 100% sure what the problem was or how to fix it. The company even released an announcement stating that, quote, "We have been working hard to address reported issues with reddish-brown bricks becoming brittle and breaking under use. The issues have been identified and we are happy to announce that they have been fixed. We waited until now to make the announcement as we wanted to be 100% certain all issues had been addressed and fixed." So it seems like any pieces made after 2017 should be safe. However, it's not just bricks that can become fragile. LEGO sets can also break and fall apart. The bonsai tree is quite possibly the most commonly owned LEGO set out there and is responsible for the massive popularity of the botanicals theme, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. While this set's stand and flower pot are stable, the same can't be said for the tree itself. The leaves and branches are all surprisingly sturdy and aren't likely to go anywhere on their own. However, the base of the tree is a different matter entirely, and has earned this set a reputation as one of LEGO's most fragile builds. The base of the tree is well known for popping off with even the slightest bump, and if we take a look at the instructions, we can see the problem. Starting with Bag 2, you'll need to start building the tree's base by attaching several clip elements to a 6x6 round plate before moving on to the tree's trunk. The next several pages are pretty straightforward, and the construction of the trunk is possibly the most fun and complicated part of the entire build, at least until you try to attach it to the base. On step 25, you'll need to add 2 of these 2x3 plates with bars. First released back in 2017, these are some extremely versatile pieces that have made their way into nearly 200 sets. but they aren't perfect. For starters, they only have 4 studs, which means that you're only getting 66% of the normal clutch power from a 2x3 brick. Secondly, the clip bar connection isn't the strongest that LEGO makes. These clips are prone to breaking, and the connection can't support too much weight. So when step 26 has you connect the tree to the base via only these 2 clips, LEGO fans start to worry. As it turns out, those worries are well founded, and the connection between the tree and base is very weak. Luckily, this is a pure display piece and isn't going to be getting moved around too much. But I can tell you from personal experience that you do want to be very careful when handling this set or moving it to a new shelf. In fact, this reminds me of one of LEGO's fairly rare non-botanical plants, the piranha plant, which is a super fun build with 540 parts that looks great on any shelf. With the construction of the large green pipe as a base, this set is remarkably stable, despite the fact that it's also somewhat top-heavy. Unlike the bonsai tree, the chances of this build coming apart are much smaller, however, it is top-heavy, and when it falls over, it can break apart. If you've ever built this set, you've probably noticed how top-heavy this build gets thanks to its large, toothy head, which is surprisingly dense and quite heavy. As we can see in the instructions, it's connected to the stem by a single ball and socket joint. While this is a durable connection, there's almost zero friction here, and the head simply flops around, making it almost impossible to put this thing into any other pose other than the one in all of the images. You'd think that this set would have more posability, but it really doesn't. Turning from one video game theme to another, LEGO Minecraft has been quietly churning out several sets a year since 2013 and has given us some true gems in that period. One of the newest sets as of writing this video is the 665-piece Creeper. This is a somewhat unique build for this Minecraft line, as almost all of the builds are typically small-scale playsets done in minifigure scale. This guy, though, stands nearly a foot tall, towering over even the largest Minecraft sets. The issue in the set can be found pretty early on in Bag 2. While building the legs, you'll use several of these dark green hinge plates to connect the legs to the hips and allow them to move up and down. These pieces have literally zero friction and are completely incapable of supporting the legs, meaning that, like the piranha plant, trying to pose this guy is almost impossible. I've seen a lot of comments from LEGO fans on sites like Reddit kind of complaining about this set, so if you have it, let me know your thoughts below. The smallest set in today's video, the SpongeBob SquarePants Flying Dutchman, set sail in 2012 with only 241 parts and 3 unique minifigures. As a fairly small playset, people didn't have massive expectations, but this particular build had one section that stood out for all the wrong reasons. Looking at this image, you can probably tell where the weak point is in the design. The ship's mast is a tall and thin construction, with only a single point of connection. However, that connection is a Technic axle slotted through this 2x2 gray brick, and this 2x2 round brown brick. This does actually create a rather sturdy connection, but sets the stage for the real issue. The ship's sail in this set is pretty unique. It's not a cloth sail like many larger ships, and it's also not full construction like some of the smaller boats. Instead, it's a single, rather large, curved and printed element that's held in place by a single bar clip connection, which, as mentioned a moment ago, isn't terribly stable. As an added bonus, the flag on top is only stuck in with the top of a single rod, making it extremely likely to pop off. Now, going from a small ship to a much, much larger one, the 3,449-piece UCS Death Star 2 was one of the largest sets ever released back in 2005, and despite its name, was actually the first LEGO Death Star ever released. Looking at this image, you might think that this is another extremely top-heavy set that's prone to falling over, but you'd be mistaken. The base and stand are deeply integrated into the build, and this thing is not going to fall over. No, the problem with this particular set is actually the massive lasers firing from the front. It's the most standout part of this set, these neon green lasers. They're really incredible, and the design is a perfect recreation of the film. However, the construction of this part of the build is truly terrible. Just one look at page 90 of the instructions should tell you all you need to know. Yes, that's 24 1x1 round bricks stacked on top of each other with no internal support. Surrounding that, you've got 8 sets of 4 more bricks, each topped with a transparent green antenna piece. To make things worse, all of these are attached to only a single stud, meaning that all it takes is a stiff breeze to knock them off. Now, this was one of LEGO's first massive sets, and they were still figuring out how durable these sets should be. This particular design would never really be used like this again, as designers figured out better techniques and LEGO made a wider range of pieces. But credit to where credit is due, designing LEGO sets can be very complicated. However, it's actually super simple to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you enjoy looking at these sets. Jumping forward a few decades, but sticking with Star Wars, the Republic Juggernaut was released in 2025 with 813 parts, 8 minifigures, and a staggering price of $150. With that kind of price tag, people expected a seriously impressive build, and while it's not a terrible set, the design definitely left at least a few builders pretty disappointed. This set is the 8th version of the clone turbo tank, so you'd think that LEGO would have figured out the best way to design it by now. I'm sorry to say that that's not exactly the case here, but I'm not here to compare this version to previous incarnations. So let's focus on what makes this set so fragile. Handling the vehicle by the side panels or roof is likely to cause problems immediately, and I can easily imagine younger kids trying to grip it from the roof in particular. Unlike previous models which used Technic frames to support the roof, this version features no real internal support at all. Now, just to be very clear, this isn't some kind of fundamental flaw with the model, but more of an annoying weakness. It's especially troublesome because, as I mentioned, older versions didn't have this problem, so it's just a little disappointing to see LEGO forget past lessons. Moving on, the Medieval Blacksmith is one of LEGO's finest idea sets over the last several years. It contains over 2,100 pieces and 4 minifigures. Overall, this build is incredible, and like most of LEGO's large building offerings, it's a secure build that isn't likely to come undone. Well, except for one part. The apple tree in front of the building is a super well-designed sub-build that borrows a few design elements from the bonsai tree, for better and for worse. Much like the larger tree, this little guy has an incredibly unstable base and is extremely prone to falling over with even the slightest bump. To get to the bottom of this problem, though, takes a bit of explanation. If we take a look at page 42 of the instructions, we can see where the issue begins. Down at the bottom of the page, we see the first root being placed next to a small section of bricks, including 4 of these rounded 1x2 plates with holes. Over the next few pages, we see this area get built up a bit, leaving a 1x2 gap in the middle. Several pages later, we start building the tree, and as you can see, many of these small branches are held in place by a single stud, meaning that they're likely to get knocked off pretty easily. But that's just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. On step 75, you can see that the bottom of the tree has 2 brown Technic rods sticking out less than a centimeter. Jump to step 90 and the completed tree needs to be placed into the hole that we left behind a few bags earlier. The idea here is to slot the exposed Technic rods into the rounded 1x2 plates, which is certainly possible and is potentially a super solid connection. However, in this set, the rods only barely insert into the provided holes, leaving the entire tree in a particularly precarious position. Now, another set that I see a lot of LEGO fans complain about its durability is Optimus Prime. This was one of LEGO's most ambitious sets when it released in 2022. While it's hardly the first set to transform from one shape to another, it was possibly the largest and most complex, with its 1,508 bricks and being nearly 20 inches tall, or 50 centimeters. Overall, this is a great set thanks to its ample upper body articulation, good selection of accessories, and impressive display value. However, the main selling point of this set is also where it runs into a few minor issues. Transforming a completed LEGO set from a giant robot to a functioning truck is no small feat, and the designers at LEGO had to work with some serious constraints to ensure that the design matched the source material. Overall, they did a fantastic job, but this transformation has been criticized by many LEGO fans for putting too much stress on certain connections and leading to the build splitting in two. The specific issue is a combination of loose connections in Optimus's legs and a somewhat complicated transformation process. You see, transforming Optimus Prime from robot to truck takes 20 very specific steps. They must all be done in order. Applying too much pressure or failing to bend the model correctly will cause the build to break apart. It's a fragile build with a lot of loose joints and a very wonky weight distribution, which explains why so many fans have troubles with this set. Considering all of LEGO's original themes over the decades, Bionicle has some of the most dedicated fans, despite the theme's official retirement in 2009. Thanks to the line's combination of fantastic sets and interesting characters, paired with shockingly deep and rich lore, Bionicle remains a key part of many fans' childhoods. But what if I told you that Bionicle, despite all of its popular sets, actually led directly to one of LEGO's largest manufacturing disasters? A quick look around reveals hundreds of reports of broken joints from builders around the world. But why? What happened at LEGO that caused thousands of these specific parts to break? And why does it seem to be tied exclusively to the fan favorite lime green color? Well, to get to the bottom of this, we first need to know how LEGO bricks are made in the first place, how the company designs parts, and how color can have a surprising impact on the strength of plastic. This is the story of how thousands of LEGO sets were plagued by weak socket joint pieces. Nearly every LEGO brick starts its life as a tiny plastic granule of ABS plastic. These granules are delivered to LEGO's factories by the truckload every day and are stored in 14 three-story tall silos that feed the molding machines. These granules only come in a few standard colors such as red, yellow, blue, white, and black. This means that any other colors need to be made from a mixture of 2 or more colors of granules or with the help of additives such as pigments. Before being melted down, each batch of granules is mixed with a very precise amount of pigment powder, and this step is very crucial. Too much, and the color can come out uneven or brittle. Too little, and the bricks turn out pale. Once everything has been mixed up, the plastic pellets are heated to about 230 degrees Celsius or 446 degrees Fahrenheit and injected into LEGO's custom molds, where they're placed under extreme pressure. These molds define the exact shape of the part, with tolerances measured in microns, and in just 7 short seconds, the plastic cools, solidifies, and is ejected from the mold as a perfectly formed LEGO brick. Every piece is then weighed, checked for damage, and sorted into bins for packaging. LEGO's quality control is famously rigorous, with only about 18 in every 1 million parts being rejected. But here's the thing. LEGO doesn't just use one type of ABS plastic. Different parts and colors sometimes require slightly different chemical blends to achieve the right stiffness, gloss, or opacity, and that's where problems can start. A pigment that works beautifully in one color can slightly alter the chemical composition in another, affecting how the plastic flows, cools, or bonds at a molecular level. In most cases, these differences are invisible, but in rare cases, they can be disastrous. But why? How can a different color impact the durability of a piece? Well, it all comes down to chemistry. When LEGO mixes dyes and pigments into its plastic, those colors don't just sit in the plastic like sprinkles on a birthday cake. They actually interact with it at a molecular level. The pigments form molecular bonds within the plastic, subtly changing how everything binds together and how well the finished bricks will respond to heat, pressure, and age. Some pigments are completely inert, meaning that they don't interact with the plastic at all, and everything will go according to plan. However, some pigments, particularly those used to create bright, vibrant colors, contain organic compounds that are far more likely to interact with ABS plastic in a variety of ways. Going back to our cake metaphor, adding too much flour to a cake can cause it to be crumbly, while adding too much milk can cause it to become dense and soggy. The same is true when mixing pigments and dyes into plastic. The pigments and plastics that LEGO uses are basically the ingredients in a cake, and everything needs to be perfectly balanced. Even a fraction of a % difference in how the plastic behaves can turn a tough, flexible joint into something fragile enough to crumble in your fingers. And as we'll see later, those small chemical quirks didn't just affect lime Bionicle joints. They sparked one of the biggest quality control headaches LEGO has ever faced, but we'll come back to that story in a bit. For now, we need to jump to the year 2007. Bionicle had been out for 6 years, and fans seemingly couldn't get enough. That year, LEGO released Elec, Toa Hali, and the special store-exclusive Toa Lesovic. You may notice that the common trend between these 3 models is that they all made fairly heavy use of lime green as a secondary color or accent color. This was especially cool on Hali, as this lime green color wasn't used on any other Bionicle figures before this, and made this set a true standout for fans. Quickly though, reports began flooding in from builders with some pretty serious issues with Hali and some of the other new sets, as their lime green joints were cracking, snapping, and crumbling for seemingly no reason whatsoever. While LEGO sets have always been loved for their ability to be broken down and rebuilt, they shouldn't be literally breaking into tiny pieces. Everyone agreed that this was not LEGO's intention, and this shouldn't be happening to these pieces. However, the real question was why these pieces? LEGO had a big problem on their hands. What happened at the LEGO manufacturing plant? Well, in the meantime, LEGO fans fortunately discovered that all of the lime green joints in the Holly set could be found in 2005's Viscerek Keelerack set, as well as the even older Nui Rama from 2001. Therefore, many fans looked to get replacements from these sets. But the strangest thing was that other lime green parts, like those found in the Nocturne set, seemed to be completely unaffected. It was just the socket joints that were causing issues specifically. So was it the color or the design of this piece that really made it so brittle? Well, at this point, LEGO wasn't sure what was causing the issue, but they did have a solution in mind. Unfortunately, this solution did not go as planned, and to say that they missed the mark would be a pretty massive understatement. Here's what they did. 2008 was shaping up to be the biggest year ever for Bionicle, with LEGO advertising it as the final battle and a whole line of new sets. But these new sets were about to make the same mistake. These builds featured a redesigned socket joint with more squared ends than the original. However, these straight lines and hard corners were quickly revealed to somehow be even weaker than the previous year's model. You see, as fans began to build these brand new LEGO Bionicle sets, it was quickly revealed that the problem had spread to other colors as well. It was a disaster. Instead of simply having a weak color, LEGO had introduced a weak piece. Literally every set with a socket joint piece had now been infected by the brittle brick plague. Over the next 2 years, LEGO would continue to release Bionicle sets with these redesigned socket joints. While it was true that the lime green pieces were no longer more brittle than others, that was only because now every color was equally as brittle. At this point, even if lime green was still slightly more fragile, it was clear that the design of this piece was the problem. Sadly, LEGO was unable to solve this problem in time to save Bionicle from a brittle end. In 2010, LEGO rolled out the very first wave of Hero Factory to try to fill the void left behind by the conclusion of Bionicle. These new sets featured the same faulty design of the socket joints, and builders were quick to notice them snapping in the same way as Bionicle had. In 2011, LEGO finally found a solution and introduced the character and creature building system, featuring a return to rounded joints. While the square-shaped joints weren't retired completely, they became increasingly rare and are now no longer in use. While the modern socket joint isn't totally indestructible, it is undoubtedly a much stronger element. But how did this happen? Surely it's not just an issue with the color, right? Well, yes and no. As I mentioned earlier, LEGO had released these exact same parts in lime green in both 2001 and 2005 prior to the 2007 wave that had the brittle parts. Clearly, the company had the ability to make these parts durable so they wouldn't break. So what happened in 2007? When LEGO mixes a batch of a certain color, they usually do so in rather large volumes so that they can create an entire production run of a set in a single go. While this makes the entire manufacturing process far faster and more efficient, it also runs the risk of spreading out production errors across a potentially huge number of packages. According to several reports, the lime green batch used in the 2007 production of Bionicle sets had an impurity, resulting in thousands of microscopic air bubbles making their way into the finished products. This resulted in the parts being far more brittle than they should have been. So yes, the batch of lime green ABS plastic was faulty. Of course, you may be wondering though, why did it only affect the socket joints? And to address that, yes, you're right, other lime green pieces from that time seem to have held up fine. The simple answer is that these socket joint pieces are placed under far more intense stress and pressure than static elements like a basic 2x4 brick, meaning that they're far more likely to break no matter what color. Combining weak lime plastic and this piece that required more strength than a typical brick resulted in this disaster. In fact, this issue was only worsened by the redesigned square-shaped joints. Contrary to popular belief, this change was not made in response to the brittle green problem. LEGO realized that it was a bad batch and had addressed that issue. In fact, it was revealed that this part was redesigned as part of LEGO's ongoing attempts to add friction to the ball and socket joint connection. It had nothing to do with lime green bricks breaking. Of course, the ironic thing is that while this new design did increase friction and accomplish that successfully, it seemingly did so at the price of durability. I find this piece to be such an interesting part of LEGO's history. But moving on, let's once again take a look at some sets that have caused serious issues for LEGO fans all across the world. One small yet perfect example of what I'm talking about can be found in 2012's classic Vampire Castle set from the Monster Fighters line. With 949 pieces, this was the second largest set from this theme after the Haunted House set, and quickly earned itself a spot as one of LEGO's all-time greats. The towers are sturdy, the gate is stable, and the moonstones securely hook into place. Everything was clearly designed to stand up to some serious play. Well, almost everything. As you've likely noticed, this build features several spires with tall, pointy rods on top. While these do give the building an imposing impression, they aren't exactly up to code, so to speak. I have this set, and although it's one of my favorite sets of all time, these pieces are notorious for falling off super easily. If we look at the instructions, we can see the issue. Each of these tall spires is connected to the base by only a single stud. While that is enough to keep things connected, it's very prone to being bumped during play or knocked off when moving this set. Moving on, LEGO and NASA have an incredibly long and fascinating history of collaboration, which has given us several truly amazing builds. But you see, their track record isn't perfect, and there's at least one set that maybe should have stayed on the ground for another round of design revisions. Back in 2003, LEGO released the first version of the International Space Station, with this tiny but detailed 162-piece set. Although the overall look and feel of the final build is genuinely great, the actual design and stability of the set leaves something to be desired. To demonstrate, let's take a quick look through the instructions. Starting at the very beginning on step 8, we'll build the space station stand, and the main issue becomes apparent. As with the spires in the Vampire Castle, this entire build is supported by just 2 of these long rods. A few steps later, we can see that the entire build is, believe it or not, going to be supported by 2 of the weakest connections I've seen in a LEGO set. As we go further, we're supposed to just keep adding onto this delicate frame until we're done. Even if you manage to make it this far without knocking the set over, that certainly won't last, and many fans say that this is the most fragile set they own. On a positive note though, LEGO did eventually release a new version of the ISS in 2020, and this one is much larger and much more stable. In fact, this set was even sent to the real space station to be assembled in space by Japanese astronaut Satoshi Furukawa. Now, perhaps the most famous example of an overly sensitive LEGO set is WALL-E, released back in 2015. Based on the now classic Pixar film, this build was originally designed and pitched by Angus MacLane, the movie's directing animator. LEGO actually quickly agreed to this idea, believing that if anyone could bring the cute little robot to life, it was him. When this set was first released, it included a total of 677 pieces, and the final build was a faithful recreation of the on-screen version with every detail captured in glorious plastic. According to LEGO's official description at the time of release, this set took almost a decade to perfect, and that it, quote, incorporates many authentic WALL-E characteristics, including a posable neck and adjustable head. Now, with that type of marketing, this set seemed to be poised to hit the sweet spot between a great display piece and something you could actually play with. However, sadly, it seems like even a full 10 years in development wasn't quite enough, and just as customers were getting their hands on the set, many were reporting a major issue with the build. It turns out that there was a small problem with the hinges connecting the head to the torso. WALL-E's head, with those big expressive eyes, were maybe a bit too large, and the connections were a bit too loose. Several early reviews specifically called out this issue prior to LEGO's full release of this set. As it turned out, the joints holding the head, while incredibly secure, simply didn't have enough friction to hold the heavy section in place. The problem was so bad that builders were flooding forums, asking whether they'd made a mistake while building, since even the smallest bump would cause WALL-E's head to rotate backward 180 degrees and tip over. Now, LEGO fans are a clever lot, and many were quick to find solutions using spare parts they had on hand. However, LEGO wasn't going to let this problem go unanswered, and they quickly recalled any unsold WALL-E units before shipping out fixed models. But what about people who already owned the defective version? Well, anyone who had bought the original release from the LEGO website was automatically sent a small package containing a few new parts and a small instruction manual. This supplemental bag came with fewer than a dozen parts, but these were more than enough to fix the problem. How'd they do it? Well, if you just take a look at the original neck, you'll notice that the head is held up by a ratchet joint. That's a solid choice, and these pieces are great for holding things in place as long as you're only worried about motion in one direction. However, the peg on top of the ratchet joint has almost zero friction, meaning that there wasn't anything preventing the head from simply spinning around. The revised design used a ball and socket joint, which was able to provide the support, flexibility, and friction needed to keep the head in place without affecting the look of the final build. This redesign even managed to use one fewer piece, reducing the set's total count to 676 pieces. Now, sticking with space for a little bit longer, the WALL-E set reminds me of another set that was pretty fragile, the Exosuit from 2014, which was one of LEGO's earliest LEGO Ideas sets, and the company at the time was still figuring out just how far they could push fan designs. Overall, this is a fun build with a great attention to detail, but that detail comes at a price. This package comes with only 321 parts, but almost none of them are any larger than a round 2x2 brick. There's a lot of tiny pieces in this set. In fact, almost every detail of this build is small, fiddly, and only connected by one or two weak points. Regardless, it all comes together well enough to make this a fan favorite display piece despite it being a bit fragile. Next up, let's take a look at the skies, because Aeris's eagle and scepter from the Legends of Chima line might have faded into obscurity nowadays, but it's a classic example of what Chima did so well, combining animals and vehicles into something we haven't seen much of before or since. The legs might be a little wonky looking, but it's the wings that have earned this set a spot in today's video. As a vehicle representing the eagle tribe, this jet couldn't just have regular wings, it needed feathers, and that's exactly where the issue comes up. You see, beginning on page 61, you'll start building the wings, and each of these will need 4 of these plates with a vertical bar. A few pages later, you find yourself attaching an equal number of these robot arms before slotting the feathers into place. Now, the connection between the robot arms and the feathers is solid. That's not the issue. The issue is that the robot arms have a bad habit of popping off the bars they're attached to with even the slightest bump. Since these feathers were quite long, they were easily knocked during play, and any downward force on them would dislodge the arm bar connection. Another fragile ship, the super secret police dropship, was released as part of the LEGO Movie sets back in 2014, and while it's hardly the most impressive set from that line, it's a unique build with 854 parts and some pretty cool minifigures. At first glance, it seems like a solid build, thanks to the ship's large, blocky body and massive cockpit element. While the majority of the build is as solid as it looks, thanks to some great Technic parts usage when constructing the frame, the issues that some builders have complained about come from the ship's many small external decorations and accents, which, according to some reports, tend to pop off quite easily while playing. Moving from the sky to the sea, Metalbeard's Sea Cow was released as part of the same wave as the dropship, but with more than 3 times the pieces at 2,741 bricks. This build is simply gorgeous, and the level of detail inside and out is amazing. Unfortunately, as with the Exosuit, this level of detail comes at the price of stability, and certain parts of this ship are known to be more fragile than they should be. Now, it's important to point out that most of the LEGO Movie sets are designed to be played with first and foremost. However, the Sea Cow is very much a display piece above all else. In fact, this might be the most fragile and delicate ship that LEGO has ever put out, at least at this scale, and that has caused some LEGO fans some unnecessary struggle and hassle. Several pieces can be easily broken off and lost, especially when removing parts to access the ship's interior. Despite the fragility of this set, the ship just looks so cool. It really is a perfect display piece, and even the building process has been universally praised, which has earned this build a stellar reputation, as long as you're not too rough with it. The fact is that despite this set being a bit fragile, most LEGO fans look past this, and this has even had the added effect of increasing this set's resale value, which currently sits around $400 even for a used copy. Returning from our sea voyage, let's take a look at this set, the original version of the ATTE. This build was introduced in 2003 and hasn't really aged very well when compared to newer versions. While the visual design has certainly improved over the last 20 plus years, it's the stability that I'm more interested in here, or should I say the lack thereof. Apparently, this early model had some serious design flaws that prevented it from being a truly classic set. The biggest issue here is the legs. This set had a bad habit of breaking down if even the slightest pressure was applied to the top, thanks to how the legs connect to the larger frame. Looking at the instructions for this set, you can see that each of the legs has 2 Technic rods at the top that simply slide into the main frame. While this is fine on its own, the extremely wide angle of the walker's stance means that these legs are very prone to dislocation. However, it's not just ships that are known for their fragility, and even some larger buildings have a bit of a bad rap regarding stability. As a prime example, 2007's Ferris wheel was one of LEGO's earliest attempts at a functioning carnival ride, and was, for the most part, a successful effort. With just over 1,000 pieces and standing nearly 23 inches tall or 60 centimeters, this build certainly pops. Maybe a little bit too much though. It seems that LEGO was far more interested in functionality than durability, and many builders have reported that the Ferris wheel's arms pop off rather easily if you try to move them manually. Additionally, the passenger cars have a tendency to slide down the Technic rods over time. However, the most fragile building out there might just be the Upside Down from Stranger Things. While most people report that the build is surprisingly stable once it's completed, getting to that point can be more than a little tricky. As you wrap up the build, you'll need to attach the two major sections of this building. The process is pretty complicated and requires a steady hand. You'll be required to build the two support trees, however this is the easy part, and what comes next has led to more than a few dropped and shattered sets. This is no easy task, even for the most experienced builders, and you'll almost certainly want a second set of hands to help you out. Once it's all put together though, the end result is quite stable, but it's a bit of a hassle to get to that point. So with all of this being said, do you think these are examples of LEGO's deteriorating quality or just design mistakes that can be improved? Let me know your thoughts below and subscribe to catch my next video.